The wind came screaming off the hills, tearing through Riverbend Creek like a pack of starving wolves. It howled across the rooftops, rattled the shutters on the one-room schoolhouse, and slipped icy fingers beneath the doorframe where Miss Eliza Carrington stood coatless, breath visible, eyes scanning the empty road. The children had all gone home an hour before, stomping through the snow in groups of 2 and 3, wool scarves wrapped tight and mittens trailing behind. Eliza had stayed behind to clean the chalkboard, though truthfully it was just to avoid walking back to her cabin. That small house held only silence now, and memories she couldn't bear to face before the sun had set. 6 months a widow, 3 months unpaid, and 1 blizzard away from being forgotten. Eliza pulled her shawl tighter and stepped outside. Her boots sank into snow nearly to her knees. The wind bit at her cheeks, her lips chapped and raw. Every step toward the edge of town felt heavier than the last. The lantern she carried flickered in protest, casting long, wavering shadows across the snow-covered ground. Stubborn as your husband was, maybe more, old Mrs. Carter had said when she refused charity from the church women last week. Eliza didn't care. She'd buried her pride when she buried Thomas. All that was left now was the promise she'd made to keep the school running, to teach the children of Riverbend, even if the world froze solid. And tonight it nearly had. By the time she reached her cabin, her hands were numb, and the key slipped twice before the lock clicked. Inside, the air was no warmer. The fireplace stood cold and dark, the last of her firewood used up the night before. She lit the single lamp by the window and dropped her satchel by the door. Thomas's coat still hung there, untouched, a monument to a man who had gone off into the storm one day to find help and never returned. Eliza sank into the rocking chair, unwrapped her scarf, and stared at the empty hearth. It wasn't hunger that twisted her belly. It was the silence. Then came the knock. She started, breath catching in her throat, a single firm knock on her door in the middle of a snowstorm. "Miss Carrington," a deep voice called through the wood. She stood slowly, fingers brushing the pistol on the mantel. "Who is it?" called her roar from South Ridge. Eliza hesitated. She knew the name. Everyone did. Owner of Roar Cattle Company. War veteran lived alone in the hills with more horses than friends. He'd been in town last month speaking at the church about trail routes and barbed wire conflicts. Cold-eyed, straight-backed trouble. "What do you want?" "Firewood," he said simply. "And a decent meal if you'll have it." Her grip loosened from the pistol. "I haven't got much." He didn't reply. When she opened the door, he stood framed in the storm. Hat dusted in snow, coat heavy with ice, one arm cradling a canvas sack of chopped wood. "I heard about your situation," he said. "Didn't come to pity you, just thought maybe we could help each other." Eliza didn't speak, just stepped aside and let him in. He stacked the wood by the hearth without a word, pulled kindling from his pack and knelt, striking a match with practiced ease. The fire caught slowly, glowing soft and orange in the darkness. She stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching. "You've been watching the schoolhouse," she said flatly. "Every morning this week, wasn't trying to hide it." "Why?" He didn't look at her, wanted to see how long you'd last. Eliza stiffened. "I don't need a savior, I didn't say you did." He looked up then, and in the flickering firelight his expression softened just a little. "But I know what it is to try and hold the world together with frost in your bones." The silence between them lengthened. The fire crackled warmer now, casting gold across the bare wooden floor. "Why now?" she asked. "Why come tonight?" He sat back on his heels. "Because there's a storm coming that'll swallow this whole valley if someone doesn't intervene. And because if you'll let me, I'd rather not see a good woman die for the sake of her pride." Her throat tightened. "You don't know me, not yet." Later they ate what little she had left, stale bread and weak broth. Calder didn't complain. He didn't offer to replace it either. Just sat by the fire, telling her about cattle trails and wolves in the high hills, about losing a brother to war and a wife to fever. She told him nothing, but still somehow he seemed to understand. When he stood to leave, he left half the wood by the hearth and a small parcel on the table, flour, coffee, and a small wedge of cheese. "I'll be back," he said at the door, to check on the children to see if your pride's thought any. Eliza didn't answer, but when she closed the door behind him, she realized her hands weren't shaking anymore. Outside, the wind screamed like something dying. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady. And for the first time in weeks, Eliza Carrington let herself hope. The storm had not passed. It had worsened. Snow blew in sideways like daggers, piling high against the schoolhouse walls and bearing fences in ghostly drifts. In town, doors stayed bolted, windows shuttered, and no one ventured out unless they had no other choice. Eliza Carrington had no other choice. Each morning she walked to the schoolhouse with her coat buttoned tight and her scarf wrapped high. Each day, fewer children arrived. By Friday, only 3 of them stood shivering in the yard. Mary Goodwin, whose father had broken his leg in the barn. Polly Talbot, who wore his brother's hand-me-down boots with paper stuffed in the toes, and little Sadie Flynn, who hadn't spoken since her mother died the month before. Eliza gathered them inside, lit what was left of her kindling, and tried to carry on. She taught arithmetic by candlelight, wrapped Sad's hands in her own to keep them warm, and read from a battered copy of Little Women as the wind rattled the panes. By noon the fire had gone out. Her fingers ached with cold. Still she kept reading. "I've got the key to my castle in the air," she said softly, "but whether I can unlock the door remains to be seen." The words caught in her throat. That's when the door opened again. "School's closed," Calder Roar announced as he stepped inside, his boots scattering snow across the floorboards. The children stared. Polly blinked. "Who says I do?" Calder removed his hat, flakes dusting the floor. "Storm's turn. This place isn't safe." Eliza rose to her feet slowly. "You can't just barge in, and I brought the wagon." He cut her off, eyes hard. "Blankets, hot water, room for 3. Eliza crossed her arms. "You're not taking my students anywhere. I already spoke to their families." He gestured toward the door, his voice calm but firm. "They know," they agreed. The children looked from Eliza to Calder. Polly had already grabbed his books. Eliza stepped in front of the door. "You should have consulted me." Calder looked down at her. "I did 3 days ago." "You just didn't listen." She felt her pride rise like a storm surge, bitter and cold. "I'm their teacher and I'm trying to keep them alive." They stared at each other, the children forgotten for a breathless moment. Finally, Eliza stepped aside. Once the children were gone, Calder returned again, uninvited again, unwelcome. He stood in the center of the empty schoolroom, studying the frost crawling up the windows. "You're going to freeze in that cabin. I'll manage." He turned slowly. "You won't, and you know it." Eliza held his gaze, jaw tight. "Then say what you came to say." Calder across the room in 3 long strides and placed a folded paper on her desk. "A contract, room and board. You teach the ranch hands children until spring." She blinked. "What? I've got a dozen kids scattered across 3 counties, smart ones, wild as coyotes. They've been riding hours to reach town when they can write it all. I'll build a classroom at the ranch. Heated, dry, safe." Eliza unfolded the page with trembling fingers. His handwriting was neat, bold. The terms were fair, generous, even a place to live. A salary, her own quarters. Her throat burned. "Why me?" "Because you didn't quit," he said simply, "when everyone else would have, and because they trust you." She read the paper again. Calder's voice softened. "I'm not offering charity, Eliza. I'm offering a partnership, something real, something good." She looked up at him then. "Really?" Looked beneath the gruff exterior, the hard set jaw, the cold eyes, was a man who had lived too much, lost too much, and still offered her shelter. It terrified her. "I don't want to owe you. You won't. I keep my independence, of course. And if I choose to leave in the spring, then you leave." Eliza set the contract down. "I'll think about it." Calder nodded, putting his hat back on. "I'll be back in the morning." That night, the wind wailed through the eaves like a living thing. Eliza sat by the fire, the contract in her lap, Charles's coat hanging untouched on the hook by the door. She didn't cry. She hadn't since the funeral. But she stared at the flames and whispered one word into the silence. Please, for warmth, for grace, for a chance she hadn't dared to want. The storm raged on, but morning would come. The snow hadn't let up. It came down in thick curtains, erasing the lines between land and sky, between past and future. But for the first time in weeks, Eliza Carrington was warm. She sat on the edge of a narrow bed, tucked into the corner of what had once been the ranch's library. Now it was a makeshift classroom with oil lamps on every wall, a slate board hung between 2 windows, and 10 small desks built from repurposed crates. Calder's classroom had been promised and delivered in 2 days flat. He was a man of few words, but when he gave one, it seemed to hold weight. Eliza rose and crossed to the fire. The warmth of it wrapped around her like a shawl. A kettle hissed gently on a nearby stove and the scent of fresh coffee filled the room. She allowed herself a moment to breathe. Then came the sound of hooves. Outside, a wagon clattered into the yard, and seconds later the door burst open with a gust of snow and laughter. Miss Carrington. 10 children poured inside, shaking snow from their hats and scarves, boots thurring across the wooden floor. They were younger than she expected, ages ranging from 6 to 12 and rougher too. Most wore patched clothes and carried worn slates tucked under their arms, but their eyes sparkled, and they greeted her with a curiosity that had nothing to do with manners and everything to do with wonder. "You really a teacher?" one boy asked, his cheeks pink from the cold. "I am," Eliza replied, brushing snow from his shoulder. "Ma says you used to teach in town," a girl chimed in before the blizzard. "I still do," she answered gently, "just in a different room." The children clustered together, uncertain of where to sit. Eliza gestured toward the desks. "Anywhere you'd like." They filed in noisily, talking, laughing. No fear in them, no sense of the weight she'd carried since Thomas died. It was as if their presence pushed the cold further away. She picked up a piece of chalk. "Let's begin." By midday, the classroom was alive. Eliza moved between the desks, answering questions, guiding hands across slates, praising progress. She learned their names, Rosa, Joseph, May, Samuel, and the rest, and saw something in them she hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. They were smart, eager. Some couldn't spell their own names, but could list every part of a saddle or count cattle in 3 languages. When she asked them to draw something they loved, one child sketched the ranch house. Another drew a mare with a crooked hoof. Rosa drew a picture of Eliza standing by the blackboard, a fire glowing behind her. The likeness made her eyes sting. At noon, Calder entered carrying a tray of bread, stew, and mugs of hot milk. The room went silent as the children stood instinctively. He wasn't just the man who ran the ranch, he was a myth to them. "Eat," he said simply, setting the tray down. "Thank you, Mr. Roar," Rosa said softly. He nodded once and left as quietly as he'd come. Eliza served the food in silence. The children ate hungrily, and she noticed several of them offering half their bread to others without a word. She didn't eat. Her hunger was of a different kind. That evening the children were sent home in sleds pulled by sturdy horses. Calder had thought of everything. Eliza remained behind, wiping chalk from her hands when she heard the soft knock at the door. He stepped inside, dusting snow from his coat. "You made an impression," he said. "They made one too." Calder watched her for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he stepped forward and placed a wrapped bundle on her desk. "A blanket," he said. "Wool hand-stitched. I have one now. Do you have two?" Eliza hesitated, then reached out and touched the fabric. It was thick, lined with cotton and stitched in neat patterns, roses blooming in red thread against deep blue. "Your wife?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Catherine, she made them the winter before she passed." Eliza's hand stilled. "You keep her work in the classroom." "She believed in warmth," he said simply, "even for strangers." A silence settled between them, comfortable this time, measured. "I should go," he said finally. Eliza nodded. "Good night, Mr. Roar." He paused at the door. "You can call me Calder." She didn't respond, and he didn't press. But after he left, she folded the blanket around her shoulders and stood near the fire. The scent of smoke and snow mixing with something older. Grief maybe, or something starting to heal. Later, as she marked papers by lamplight, she found Rose's drawing again. Eliza surrounded by children smiling in front of a fire. At the corner, the little girl had written, "Our new teacher. She makes the cold go away." Eliza pressed the page to her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe she could be that person. Maybe. Just maybe she already was. The snow finally stopped. In its place came a brittle, aching cold, the kind that sank into bone and never fully left. The valley was quiet beneath its blanket of white, and the skis were pale blue, sharp as glass. Smoke curled from chimneys. Icicles hung like daggers from every roof line. Inside the library turned classroom, the children peeled off gloves and scarves with cheerful chatter. Eliza greeted them with a smile and warm mugs of tea, one of Mrs. Chen's additions to the school routine. The fire burned strong, the windows held. For once everything felt right. But that night the storm came from within. It started with a cough. Eliza had just finished sweeping when she heard it, harsh and deep, echoing from somewhere near the barn. She stepped outside, scarf pulled tight, and spotted Calder doubled over by the horse trough, one hand gripping the rail. "Mr. Roar," she called, voice sharp. He straightened too quickly, breath catching. "Just a cough." "You're bleeding," she said flatly, eyes narrowing as he swiped his sleeve across his mouth. A smear of red stained the wool. Calder winced. "I'm fine," but Eliza was already at his side, guiding him, half pulling him toward the main house. His body was warm, too warm, feverish. By the time they reached the parlor, he was shaking. "Sit," she ordered. "Don't argue." He didn't. She stoked the fire, fetched a basin, wet cloths, and forced water between his lips. Calder tried to protest, but she gave him the same stare she used on Polly Talbot when he misbehaved. "I've done this before," she said. "My husband, he got sick that last winter. I know what this is." Calder looked at her through fevered eyes. "You never talk about him." "No," she said softly. "I don't." Thomas Carrington had been a quiet man, good with horses, better with silence. When the fever came, it burned fast, 3 days from first cough to last breath. Eliza had spent those days by his side, trying every folk remedy the neighbors whispered about. Onion tea, camphor, boiled vinegar, none of it worked. "I buried him with my own hands," she said now, pressing the cloth to Calder's brow. "The ground was frozen, took me all night." Calder didn't speak. His eyes fluttered closed. "I swore I'd never care again," Eliza whispered, "because it always ends like that, in fire or frost." "Always?" He reached up suddenly, grabbing her wrist. "Not rough, but firm. I'm not him," he rasped. "I know," and she did, because when she looked at Calder, she didn't see Thomas. She saw a man who had lived through different storms, a man who knew grief the way she knew hunger, always there, never loud. He drifted into sleep. Eliza sat beside him, feeding logs into the fire, wiping sweat from his face, whispering nonsense just to keep him tethered to the world. She stayed all night. At dawn, the fever broke. Calder opened his eyes clearer now and found her slumped in the chair beside him, head resting on her arms. "Eliza," she stirred, blinking. "You're awake." "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "For what?" "For making you remember." She shook her head. "Some memories don't go away, but you don't have to carry mine. You've got enough of your own." A silence passed between them, then called her head quietly. "Catherine died 5 winters ago. Fever, too. She was strong, stubborn. She kept teaching at the mission school until she collapsed in the snow." Eliza's breath caught. "I built this school for her," he said, "but I didn't open it. I couldn't." "You did now." "No." He turned to look at her. "You did." That afternoon, the children brought drawings of snowmen and cattle and dreams. Rosa had sketched Eliza again, this time with Calder sitting beside her, a fire glowing between them. She smiled despite herself. Later in her room, she found a parcel wrapped in burlap, new boots, a pair of soft gloves, and a small book of poetry. No note, no signature, but she knew. And in the drawer beside her bed, she placed the book next to Thomas's pocket watch, not as a replacement, but as a sign of something new. The thaw came slowly. It started with drips from the eaves, the whisper of melting snow sliding off rooftops in the late morning sun. Trails hardened to packed mud, not ice, and with the melt came visitors' curious eyes, wagging tongues. By the time Eliza reached the general store in town, the gossip had outrun her. "Did you hear?" whispered Mrs. Felton behind a barrel of flour. "He's taken her in. That school teacher living in his house, teaching his children." "She's not his children's mother," snapped Mrs. Weller, folding linens. "And it's indecent. She's still in mourning. She doesn't wear black anymore." "Well, that says it all." Eliza stood on the other side of the store shelf, her spine straight, hands clenched tight around the strap of her basket. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Shame burned hot under her skin, not because of the lie, but because part of it was true. She was still his wife, still Thomas's widow. But when she looked at Calder Roar, she didn't feel like a widow anymore, and that terrified her. When she returned to the ranch, Calder was in the barn, sleeves rolled up, hay clinging to his shirt. He looked up when she entered, eyes immediately narrowing at her flushed cheeks. "What happened?" "Nothing," she said too quickly. He wiped his hands and crossed to her. "Talk." She met his gaze with difficulty. "They're saying things that I've given up mourning, that I've taken your house and your name without earning either." Calder's jaw tightened. "Then let's give them something proper to talk about." "What?" He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a ring. It was a contract again. Read it in silence. Her name at the top, his at the bottom. The terms were different now. Marriage by law, by name, but also by agreement, her own room, full authority over the school, complete independence outside social appearances, and most crucially, no obligations beyond what she chose to give. "It'll protect you," Calder said, voice low. "Your reputation, the school, the children, and you," she asked. He shrugged. "I've lived under scrutiny since Catherine died. I'm not doing this for me." She hesitated. "You've already given me food, shelter, work," she whispered. "Now you want to give me your name. I want to give you a shield," he said. "The world bites hard, Eliza. This will make it think twice." The marriage was quiet. No guests, no rings, just Reverend Whittam at the ranch house, a Bible between them and Mrs. Chen standing as witness. Eliza wore a simple green dress, the only one not sewn for mourning. Calder looked at her like she was sunlight on snow. They said the vows, signed the papers. He didn't touch her hand until the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride." Even then, he only brushed her cheek, but Eliza's heart ached with the weight of it. That night, she sat in her own room, fire crackling. The marriage certificate tucked into her drawer beside the book of poetry and Thomas's watch. Outside, snow fell again, soft and slow. A knock at her door. "Come in," she said. Calder stepped inside, hesitating. "I brought you something." He held out a small pot, dirt and roots barely blooming, a rose bush. She blinked. "It's not spring." "No," he said, "but I thought maybe you were ready for something to grow." She took it, hands trembling. "I don't love you," she said suddenly. "I know. I don't know if I can. I'll wait." "Even if it never comes," he smiled just barely. "Even then." Eliza looked down at the rose, one small bud pushing through cold soil. And for the first time since Thomas's death, she wanted something more. The first crocus pushed through the snow on a Wednesday. Eliza spotted it outside the classroom window, bright purple against the white, trembling but unbroken. She smiled and touched her belly absent-mindedly. The child wasn't due yet, not for another month, but life had a way of arriving early in the valley. The children had noticed her changes long before she'd said a word. Rosa had asked first, of course, eyes wide, voice soft, "Is there a baby in there, Miss Eliza?" And Samuel had followed it with, "Does that mean Mr. Roar is your real husband now?" Eliza had laughed then, nervous and a little sad. "He always was," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." The day of the bloom, Calder returned from town with 2 crates, one filled with school supplies, the other with spring seedlings. "They're your own," he said, setting them on the porch. "If you want them, I do." He didn't say more, just nodded and turned to feed the horses, but she followed him. Called her, he turned, the sunlight caught in his hair, lighter now than it had been in winter. Softer, she took a breath. "I've been sleeping with your name for nearly 2 months now. I think it's time I stop pretending it doesn't matter." His brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." Her voice cracked. "I didn't think I could. Not after Thomas, but you." Her voice broke entirely. He crossed the space between them, cupped her face in his hands like something sacred. "Say it again." "I love you," called your. His lips found hers, gentle, unsure, and the kiss was nothing like their arrangement. It was everything their silence had been building toward. Months of shared pain, quiet glances, unspoken care. It was a thaw, a bloom. When they broke apart, Eliza leaned her forehead to his chest and laughed softly. "And here I thought I was the one teaching the lessons," he chuckled. "Guess we're both learning." That night, Calder moved the rose bush into her room. No, their room, it had 3 buds now. One opened under the lamplight, delicate petals curling open to reveal a vibrant red bloom. "Catherine grew winter roses," Calder said softly. "I thought they were impossible to keep alive." Eliza smiled. "Maybe they just needed the right hands." The child came on a warm morning in late April. Rosa ran to fetch the doctor while Mrs. Chen prepared water and blankets. Calder never left Eliza's side. He held her hand through every cry, every breath, every heartbeat. And when their son arrived, red-faced, wailing, full of life, Eliza wept. They named him Thomas James Roar. Thomas for memory, James for strength, Roar for home. The first bell of the spring semester rang out over Riverbend a week later. Children flooded back to the schoolhouse, their laughter echoing down the valley. Eliza sat on the porch, baby in her arms, called her arm around her shoulders. A new school term, a new life, a new season. She pressed a kiss to their son's forehead and whispered, "You were born from winter, but you are made of spring." Calder turned to her, voice low and full. "I told you I'd wait." She smiled. "And I told you it was worth it." And so, across these unforgiving lands, another tale drifts away with the wind. If this quiet courage, this stubborn heart touched you in any way, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story on to someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe, because out here, there are still so many truths left to tell, each one carved from pain, hope, and dust. This is Wild West Stories. Thank you for watching.